SharkBite fittings are supposed to make plumbing easier, but if you are making even one of these mistakes, you are practically guaranteeing a leak. After 3 decades of fixing other people's plumbing disasters, I can tell you that most SharkBite failures come down to the same handful of errors that are completely avoidable. Today, I am walking you through 7 mistakes that will cause a SharkBite fitting to leak every single time, and pay close attention when we get to number 6. Because that one catches even experienced DIYers off guard. Plus, I have got a bonus tip at the end that could save your whole install. The first mistake, and honestly the most common one I see out in the field, is not deburring the pipe after cutting. Here is what happens. You grab your pipe cutter or your hacksaw, you make your cut, and you are in a hurry, so you just shove the pipe right into the SharkBite fitting without thinking twice. The problem is that every single cutting method leaves behind burrs on the inside edge of the pipe. A tubing cutter leaves a raised inner lip. A hacksaw leaves jagged metal shavings. Even a nice sharp copper cutter will push a small ridge of material inward. Those little ridges and rough spots might look completely harmless to the naked eye, but they are absolute killers when it comes to push to connect fittings. See, inside every SharkBite fitting, there's a small rubber O-ring, usually made of a material called EPDM. That O-ring is what creates the watertight seal between the fitting and your pipe. It is the only thing standing between you and a water disaster. When you push a burred pipe into the fitting, those sharp edges slice right into that soft rubber, like a tiny knife. Sometimes the damage is instant, and you will see a drip within minutes of turning the water back on. Other times, it creates a tiny nick that slowly wears into a full leak over days or even weeks, as water pressure constantly pushes against that weakened spot. Either way, you are going to have water where you do not want it. The fix is simple and takes almost no time at all. After every single cut, take a deburring tool or even a piece of medium grit sandpaper and clean up both the inside and outside edges of that pipe. You want it smooth to the touch all the way around, with no rough spots, no raised edges, and no metal shavings hanging on. A good deburring tool costs less than $10 and fits right in your pocket. There's absolutely no reason to skip this step. If you remember nothing else from this entire video, remember this. A clean, smooth pipe end is the foundation of every successful SharkBite connection. Rush this part, and nothing else you do downstream matters one bit. The second mistake that leads to leaks is skipping the depth gauge and insertion mark. SharkBite actually includes a little plastic depth gauge with most of their fittings, and I am constantly amazed at how many people toss it aside with the packaging or do not even know what it is for. Here is why it matters so much. Every SharkBite fitting requires the pipe to be inserted to a very specific depth in order for the O-ring and the grab ring to do their jobs properly. If you push the pipe in too little, even by a fraction of an inch, the O-ring might barely be touching the pipe surface. That means you will get a drip or even a full blow-off under pressure, which can send water spraying across your utility room in a heartbeat. The depth varies depending on the pipe size, and this is where people get tripped up because they assume one size fits all. For example, a 1/2-inch fitting needs the pipe inserted about 1 inch. A 3/4 inch fitting needs about 1 1/8 inches. and a 1-inch fitting requires about 1 3/8 inches. What you should do every single time, without exception, is use the depth gauge or a simple tape measure to figure out the correct insertion depth for your pipe size. Then take a permanent marker or a piece of tape and put a clear, visible mark on the pipe at that exact distance from the end. When you push the pipe into the fitting, that mark should end up right at the edge of the fitting body, flush against it. If you can still see a gap between your mark and the fitting, the pipe is not fully seated. Push harder. Sometimes it takes a surprising amount of force, especially on 3/4 inch and 1-inch connections. Do not be afraid to really lean into it. You might even want to brace the fitting against something solid while you push. That visual confirmation from your mark lining up with the fitting edge is your absolute best friend on these connections. Without it, you are just guessing. And guessing is exactly how leaks happen behind walls, where you cannot see them until the damage is done. The third mistake is using SharkBite on kinked or damaged pipe. This one is especially common when people are working with older copper pipe in their basement or PEX tubing that has been bent, stressed, or sat in a garage for a while. It might seem like a perfectly good idea to save time by reusing a section of pipe that has a slight kink or dent in it. After all, the fitting just pushes on. So what difference does a little dent make? A huge difference, actually. SharkBite fittings rely on consistent, perfectly round pipe geometry to create a proper seal. The O-ring has to make full, even contact all the way around the entire circumference of the pipe. Even a small dent, an oval shape from being stepped on, or a flattened spot from a pipe hanger, means there is a gap somewhere in that seal, and water will find that gap. Every single time, without fail. It does not matter how small it looks to you. Water under pressure is relentless, and it only needs a pathway the width of a human hair to start causing damage. With copper, look carefully for green corrosion, dents, dings, or sections where the pipe has been bent and straightened back out. That straightened section is never truly round again, even if it looks okay from the outside. With PEX, check for kinks, creases, white stress marks, or areas where the tubing has been pinched by a clamp, staple, or sharp bend. If you see any damage within a couple inches of where the fitting will go, cut it back further to a clean, completely undamaged section. Do not try to save an extra inch of pipe. Good pipe is cheap, just pennies per foot. Water damage is not. I have personally seen homeowners try to save a $2 piece of pipe and end up with a $2,000 ceiling repair because a slow leak went undetected for weeks. Always start with a straight, round, undamaged section of pipe, and your SharkBite fitting will perform exactly the way it was designed to. By the way, if you're finding this advice helpful, you should know it's just a small sample of what I've put into my new guide, the Ultimate Plumbing Playbook. It's packed with step-by-step instructions for hundreds of repairs that can save you thousands. To grab your copy, you can scan the QR code on the screen right now, or just use the first link in the description below. All right, let's continue. The fourth mistake on our list is not removing the tube liner on copper pipe, and this one is probably the most misunderstood of all 7 mistakes we are covering today. If you have ever opened up a SharkBite fitting package, you may have noticed a small plastic tube liner sometimes called a stiffener or insert, sitting inside the fitting or included separately in the packaging. That liner exists for a very specific and important reason. It is designed to support the inside wall of soft, flexible tubing, like PEX, so that when the stainless steel grab ring bites down and the O-ring compresses against the outside, the tubing holds its perfectly round shape and does not collapse under that pressure. Without the liner in soft tubing, the walls could deform slightly inward and break the seal, giving you a leak. Here is where the confusion comes in, and I see this mistake constantly. Copper pipe does not need that liner. Copper is a rigid material that holds its shape completely on its own under the compression forces inside a SharkBite fitting. But many SharkBite fittings come with the liner pre-installed right from the factory because the same universal fitting is designed to work on copper, PEX, and CPVC. If you are connecting to copper and you leave that liner in place, it can actually prevent the copper pipe from inserting to the full required depth. The liner takes up space inside the fitting, and that rigid copper pipe has nowhere to go but stop short. You end up with a partial insertion, and we already talked about what that causes in mistake number 2. So the rule is straightforward and easy to remember. If you're working with PEX or polybutylene, the liner stays in because those materials need the internal support. If you're working with copper or CPVC, the liner comes out. Just grab it with a pair of needle nose pliers, give it a twist, and pull it free. Takes 2 seconds and prevents a world of frustration, callbacks, and water damage down the road. The 5th mistake people make is failing to clean and prep the pipe surface before pushing on the fitting. This one sounds so basic that a lot of folks skip right past it, but it causes more slow leaks than you would ever imagine. Think carefully about what is happening inside that fitting at a microscopic level. A rubber O-ring is pressing tightly against the outside surface of your pipe to create a watertight seal. That seal depends on smooth, clean, consistent contact between rubber and metal or rubber and plastic. If there is anything between the O-ring and the pipe, you have a problem. On older copper pipe, especially in homes built before the 1980s, you will often find green oxidation, old flux residue from previous solder joints, mineral deposits from hard water, or just years of grime and dust built up on the surface. Each of those contaminants creates tiny imperfections that prevent the O-ring from sitting flush. On PEX, you might find dirt, permanent marker ink from a previous installer, adhesive residue from labels, or gunk from whatever the pipe was stored against in a warehouse or garage. Any of that debris can prevent the O-ring from making full 360-degree contact with the pipe. Even a tiny grain of sand or a fleck of old solder flux can create a channel for water to seep through under pressure. Before every SharkBite connection, take a piece of emery cloth or fine grit sandpaper. Around 120 grit works perfectly, and give the last 2 inches of pipe a thorough cleaning all the way around. You want to see bright, clean material on every surface the O-ring will touch. On copper, you should see that beautiful, shiny penny color with no green, no dark spots, and no residue. On PEX, just make sure the surface is completely clean and free of any marks, dirt, or residue. Then wipe it down with a clean, dry rag to remove any dust particles left behind from the sanding. This whole process takes less than 60 seconds per connection, and it is genuinely the difference between a fitting that holds reliably for 20 years and one that drips within a week and rots out your subfloor. The sixth mistake is one that catches a lot of people by surprise, and that is using SharkBite fittings in inaccessible or buried locations. SharkBite fittings are so incredibly convenient that it is tempting to use them absolutely everywhere. Behind drywall, inside finished ceilings, buried in insulation, under concrete slabs, anywhere you need a quick connection and do not want to bother with soldering or crimping. I completely understand that temptation. But here is the thing that many homeowners do not realize. Many local plumbing codes specifically require that all push to connect fittings remain accessible for future inspection and maintenance. That means if you bury a SharkBite fitting behind finished drywall without installing a proper access panel, you could be violating your local code. And if you ever need to sell your home, a sharp home inspector or a plumbing inspector will flag it, potentially holding up your sale or requiring expensive remediation work to make it right. Beyond the code issue, there is a very practical reason for this rule. Every mechanical fitting, no matter how well engineered, has some statistical chance of needing attention over its lifespan. Soldered copper joints and properly crimped PEX connections with copper crimp rings have literally decades of proven track record in inaccessible locations inside walls and underground. SharkBite fittings, while excellent products and perfectly fine for many applications, simply have not been around as long and do not have that same multi-decade history in concealed installations. If a SharkBite fitting ever does develop an issue or needs to be checked, you absolutely want to be able to reach it without tearing open a finished wall, ripping out tile, or jackhammering through a concrete floor. My advice from 30 years of doing this work is to use SharkBite fittings in accessible areas like under sinks, in unfinished basements, in utility rooms, in crawl spaces, or behind removable access panels. For anything going behind a finished wall, above a finished ceiling, or underground, strongly consider a more traditional permanent connection method like soldering or PEX crimping. And always check with your local building department if you are unsure what your specific area allows, because codes vary significantly from one jurisdiction to another. The seventh and final mistake is over-trusting SharkBite as a permanent fix on hot water lines. Now, let me be very clear right up front. SharkBite fittings are officially rated for use on both hot and cold water lines, and they are certified to handle temperatures up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit and pressures up to 200 pounds per square inch. So technically, according to the manufacturer, there is absolutely nothing wrong with using them on hot water. I am not disputing that. But here is the real-world reality that 30 years of hands-on experience has taught me, and that many professional plumbers will quietly agree with. Hot water lines put significantly more stress on any mechanical fitting than cold water lines do over the long term. The reason comes down to something called thermal cycling. Every time hot water flows through the pipe material expands slightly, sometimes enough to measure. When the water stops flowing and the pipe cools back down to room temperature, it contracts back to its original size. This happens dozens of times every single day in a typical household, every shower, every dishwasher cycle, every time someone washes their hands with warm water. Over months and years, that constant expanding and contracting can gradually wear on the O-ring inside the fitting, slowly degrading its ability to maintain that perfect seal. Cold water lines experience very little of this thermal movement, which is why SharkBite fittings on cold water supply lines tend to last, and last without any issues whatsoever. On hot water lines, especially those within the first few feet of the water heater where temperatures are at their absolute highest, the long-term reliability becomes less certain. Many professional plumbers, myself included, prefer to use SharkBite fittings on hot water lines only as temporary repair connections or in easily accessible locations where they can be visually inspected and monitored over time. For permanent hot water connections that you plan to seal behind a wall and forget about for decades, a properly soldered joint on copper or a quality crimp or expansion fitting on PEX gives you significantly greater peace of mind. If you do choose to use SharkBite on hot water lines, just make sure it is somewhere you can easily check on it every few months with a quick visual inspection. And now for the bonus tip that professional plumbers swear by. After you finish any SharkBite installation, whether it is one fitting or 10, do not just turn the water on and walk away assuming everything is fine. Instead, turn the water on slowly, let the system fully pressurize, and then take a dry paper towel and wrap it firmly around every single SharkBite fitting you installed. Press it snugly against the fitting and the pipe on both sides, and leave it there for a full 5 minutes. Then come back and carefully inspect each paper towel, looking for even the faintest hint of dampness or discoloration. If there is even the slightest moisture on that towel, you have a leak that your eyes alone might never have caught just by looking at the fitting. Water can seep out incredibly slowly on a marginal SharkBite connection, and by the time you actually see a visible drip forming, you may already have significant water damage developing behind a wall or under a cabinet. The dry paper towel test is hands down the most reliable, lowest tech leak detection method I have ever used in 3 decades of plumbing, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Make it a non-negotiable habit on every single connection you make from this day forward. Before you go, I want to make sure you know about my complete guide, the Ultimate Plumbing Playbook. It goes way deeper than we can in a single video, with 85 pages covering everything from clearing any clog to replacing your own water heater. If you want to stop wasting money on simple fixes, this book is for you. Just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description to get your copy. Thanks for watching. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one.